I'm Ashley Davis Bush. I am excited to be talking to the Change Your World Every Day community. We talked yesterday about the window of tolerance and how the goal is not to eliminate emotions, not to label them, not to repress them, but to allow them to be, to embrace them even, if you will, and to start to process and metabolize them so that you can stay in the window of tolerance and they work for you and allow you to live the full spectrum of living. So today we're going to do some application to anxiety. Anxiety. I know you all know anxiety. It's a very common emotion. Of course, they're all common. They're all part of our makeup. We talked about the baseline process yesterday of breathing, allowing, softening, and then embodying, and that's one way to help you metabolize and process emotion. But I also want you to think of emotions, as I said, they're energy in motion. It's a wave, it's a motion. You want to keep motioning, movement in your emotional world. Fear, panic, worry, anxiety, they're all in a spectrum that often will tend to get stuck and frozen and clogged, if you will. So I want to give you we're definitely going to be talking about strategies of how to unblock that. How do you melt the ice so that it's flowing again? Because every emotion has what I like to call a life cycle. That basically the life cycle of an emotion is that, much like a contraction, if you've ever given birth, there's a rise, there's a peak, and there's a fall. So there's an arising, there's a peak, and then there's a coming off, which is exactly like a wave. The wave it starts to come, it builds, it crests, and then it diminishes. This is the natural life cycle of an emotion, and it's the kind of motion that we want to keep going. Often fear will stop that in its tracks. And of course, fear, I want you to write this down, although it will be in the notes that I give to you at the end of the week. Fear is false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. Now, you might say, well, sometimes it's real evidence, like scary stats about COVID. True, and there are plenty of real things to be afraid of. So I'm not saying that there aren't, but there are plenty of things we're afraid of that don't actually ever happen to us and aren't actually real in our lives. So you could be afraid of getting COVID. You could be afraid of your loved ones getting sick. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety that's driven towards a future that may or may not ever come. And then there's the anxiety or fear or worry about something that you actually are facing. So one thing is to try to, as we pull this apart and untangle it, is this something that's actually that you're even facing, yes or no? And if so, how can you go through it with as much grace and dignity as possible? So I want to tell you about a story that just happened to me recently. I was in Guatemala, and to fly internationally, of course, you have to have a COVID test. And so I was in a place where it was sort of open, even though they had some partitions, you could hear what was going on around you. And there was a family, they were Americans, and they had two little girls, and they had to have COVID tests. She must have either had one before and it was scary, or just the uncertainty of it was scary. I happen to know that this particular place, really went pretty far back. Some of those swabs, they really feels like they're going back to the edge of your brain. Anyway, she was screaming, and I mean screaming her brains out, like, no, no, that kind of screaming. And the mom is like, you have to have it. I'm going to leave you here. What do you want me to leave you here? You have to have it. So a lot of shaming, a lot of intensity, a lot of panic. And so the little girl, I couldn't see her, mind you. I'm on the other side for a different procedure, or not a procedure, a check-in, because I had it doesn't matter. Anyway, so I hear this going, and of course my anxiety starts to rise because we tend to mirror each other's emotions. Emotions are contagious. If you see someone who's afraid, who's upset, who's anxious, often you will become the same. And you have to watch out for that contagion of emotions. In any event, the little girl, rightly so, said, I just have to calm down. Wait, let me calm down. So she was actually saying, I need to self-regulate Because that's right. She was outside of her window of tolerance. She was in the hyperarousal. She was saying to her mom, I need to get back in my window of tolerance. I need to self-regulate so I can manage this. The mother was having none of it and basically was saying, you have to do it now. It's now. You must do it. In any event, the little girl had the test, screamed her brains out. It was horrifying. Afterwards, I saw her in the waiting room, and she was just slumped over. She was in hypoarousal. And I went over to her, and I said, that sounded like it was really scary. And she said, yes. And I said, I understand that. I'm afraid of a lot of medical things. They make me nervous. Can I teach you a technique to use next time something like that happens? Because you were right. You did need to calm yourself down before you faced it so you could be grounded. She said, she kind of shrugged. She didn't, like, who's this strange lady coming to talk to her? Anyway, I taught her what's called the butterfly hug. And I'm going to teach it to you right now. Hands like this, like a butterfly. You put here on your chest and you start to tap. And you breathe, the deep, low belly breathing that we did yesterday. This tapping is doing a bilateral stimulation that is from EMDR, which is a trauma treatment that has to do with bilateral stimulation. And this was originally, I was going to say discovered, devised by a woman helping hurricane victims in Mexico. Children especially. Children obviously respond to this because it's really easy. While you're breathing and while you're doing the butterfly hug, it helps if you picture a beautiful place. A beach, river, a lake, your bedroom, a place that's beautiful or a place that you love or a place that you feel safe. And you start to self-soothe. I hope she will remember the butterfly hug her whole life. I'll never know. She may think, wow, that woman, really helped me and made my life different. Or she may forget it, or she may have thought I was a kook. But I'm here to tell you that there are ways to ground yourself when you're feeling anxious. Because anxiety, it's a very natural response. Sometimes we need anxiety. So I want to give sort of pro-anxiety, if you will. For example, I'm a performer, I'm a singer, and I recently sang with two of my friends. We're kind of the three sopranos, and we were singing, it's not even a gig, we call it them sings. I sing with something called the Threshold Choir, where we sing at the bedsides of sick and dying people. This was not actually a bedside sing, it was for a monastic community that we love. Anyway, I'm getting distracted, but I said to my friend Susie said, are you nervous? And I said, I am always nervous before I sing in front of people. And she said, me too. I think it's good for us. And I said, I agree, because it's kind of like, my son used to play the violin. If you take the bow, if it's too slack, if the horsehair is slack, you can't play. You have to tighten it. So sometimes the tightening is a sort of preparation, that anxiety. You feel the juice. You're coming alive. You're coming up for the moment. So some anxiety can be positive. So don't always think of it as a negative. It can be a motivator. It can give you energy. It can give you some drive. Sometimes worry can be productive if it motivates you to make some changes. So you might say, I'm worried about my children. If I should die, I want to make sure they're taken care of. Then make a will. Go make a will. Let that worry propel you into something positive. Now, anxiety clearly is not positive when, again, you're out of the window of tolerance and say either it's completely unproductive and there's nothing you can do, so you're just spinning your wheels, and or you're going into panic mode, panic attack. The reaction to the reaction is what makes them go forward. In other words, if you throw kerosene on the fire, if you put more logs on the fire, then it's going to escalate. Then you think you're dying of a heart attack. That's when you get thrown in an ER. You call the ambulance, you're in an ER, and they tell you you're having a panic attack. Happily, I have never been in that situation, but I know plenty of people who have. However, if when it's happening, and often you'll get the physical cues, such as your heart's racing, your hands are sweaty, maybe you feel nauseous, maybe you're feeling dizzy, you start to dissociate even, that's when you want to say, this feels like an anxiety attack. Adrenaline is squirting through my bloodstream, and I'm going to sit tight while it passes. Like the life cycle of an emotion, a panic attack cycle is going to rise, crest, and fall. Rise, crest, and fall. That's what they do. So if you ride it out, which is kind of the theme for any of these emotions, you just sort of ride it. You feel it, you don't react to it, you ride it, you say, this will be over soon, this is what it is. It's one of those things that happens to me sometimes. This is my overactive adrenaline flushing through my system. It'll be over soon. That's when you sort of nip the anxiety, the panic attack in the bud. However, if you do the opposite, which is, oh my God, my heart's racing, oh my God, it's a panic attack, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive this? When will it be over? Ah! You start to freak out. And then if you take it a step higher, I'm going to have a panic attack, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to die. You know what it's like. So there's a big difference between feeding it and not feeding it. Trusting the process, the wave, the crest, the fall, versus not. So again, energy is in motion. Just want to keep it flowing. You don't want to seize it. You don't want to hold it. You don't want to grab it. With a panic attack, FYI, because it needs energy and energy is in motion, you can try this next time. If it feels like it's taking too long for that adrenaline to like process through and metabolize, another way is to just go straight with it and try to get your heart rate even higher and do some jumping jacks. That can be an interesting process. Now, meanwhile, I don't want to recommend that to anyone who actually has heart issues and maybe is under the care of a cardiologist, so scratch that if that's the case. But if this is your garden variety panic attack, do some exercise, do some jumping jacks. Just keep that heart rate going so that it's different than feeling like it's coming from the panic and that it's just coming from a reason like, oh yeah, my heart's racing because I'm doing I'm doing jumping jacks. The thing about emotions is to not be afraid of them. To be able, yesterday we talked about naming it, name it to tame it, just to investigate it, to be curious about it, to sort of dive into it and say, what's going on here?